Welcome in to the Subconscious Mind Mastery Podcast. Thomas Miller on our Sunday series here, and I'm glad you're here. We're going to talk about returning today. Oh, I'll explain. Before we do that, though, I just feel compelled to do this. Some of you will know what I'm talking about here, but Michael O'Sullivan, this is dedicated to you, buddy. I've had something on my mind as we've been combing through. We're going to build on the brick that we laid last Sunday about the Tao Te Ching, because there were some things in there that captivated me, and one of them primarily was just a line in chapter 16 that we read last week. We'll read it again. But it talked about returning. That concept of returning is what captivated me. So I thought we could drill down on this, and eventually we're going to lead up to a returning meditation at the end. These passages of the Tao Te Ching that I've been reading are really touching my soul. Oh my goodness, this ancient wisdom 400 years before Christ is incredible. So this is an interpretation of chapter 16 that I think speaks so well. We read some of it last week. We'll go further with it this week. So chapter 16 from the Tao Te Ching. Empty yourself of everything. Let the mind rest at peace. The 10,000 things rise and fall while the self watches their return. There's the return. In Taoism, the 10,000 things basically refers to all of manifest existence, if you will. There are several different tangents of application of the 10,000 things, but basically you just think of everything that exists in our created reality. So thinking about this, the 10,000 things rise and fall while the self, our point of observation, watches their return. They grow and flourish and then return to the source. Returning to the source is stillness, which is the way of nature. The way of nature is unchanging. That return is the cycle of life. We mentioned this last week. It's being born, and it's dying, and it's returning. And then, if you believe in that, we return again. The Taoists certainly believe that. So even right there, everything, if we say everything is returning to flesh, returning to source. 2 chapters back, in chapter 14, from above, it is not bright. From below, it is not dark. An unbroken thread beyond description. It returns to nothingness. There's the return again. The form of the formless. The image of the imageless. It is called indefinable and beyond imagination. Stand before it, and there is no beginning. Follow it, and there is no end. Stay with the ancient Tao. Move with the present. Knowing the ancient beginning is the essence of Tao. And then I'm skipping back to chapter 16 now to tie this back together. Knowing consistency is insight. Not knowing consistency leads to disaster. Knowing consistency, the mind is open. With an open mind, you will be open-hearted. Being open-hearted, you will act royally. Being royal, you will attain the divine. Being divine, you will be at one with the Tao. Being at one with the Tao is eternal. And though the body dies, the Tao will never pass away. Then I'd like to read just a bit from chapter 25, and you'll kind of see how this all ties together. Something mysteriously formed before heaven and earth, in the silence of the void, standing alone and unchanging, ever present and in motion. Perhaps it is the mother of the 10,000 things. I don't know its name. Call it Tao. For lack of a better word, I call it great. Being great, it flows. It flows far away. Having gone far, it returns. Therefore, Tao is great. Heaven is great. Earth is great. Man follows the earth. Earth follows heaven. Heaven follows the Tao. The Tao follows what is natural. Now we've looped back to chapter 16, talking about nature and that which is natural, unchanging, and that consistency basically ties us to the heart and soul of the universe, that which is eternal. And what this is in essence saying is, from the perspective of that which is eternal, we observe the created, the non-eternal, through that very empty position of the eternal. And that's how we return. So think of patterns of returning. I had fun with this. I'll list a few, and then a few for you will come to your own mind. But we return to the earth, if you believe in that cycle. What about returning home? Going home after a trip? Sleeping in your own bed again? Or going home from a break at college? Or maybe you've been on an extended overseas visit at some point in your life and you finally got to go home. There's nothing like going home, is there? Home for the holidays. Now, this is with the qualifier that your home was one that was enjoyable to go home to. For many, that's obviously not the case. But there still is that return for all of us to familiar places. I thought of going back to the hometown where I was born. The home that I was born into is now gone. I got on Google, the satellite, and I elevated up above it enough to see over the fences, if you will, and look at the backyards, and I took a shot of it and sent it to my brother, and he was like, wow, I had no idea. Well, the whole side of the street where our house was has been scraped, and now they're big $1-million homes. Back a long time ago, that was Mom and Dad's starter house. So sometimes when you go back, things are not familiar. Like I wouldn't recognize anything. Recognize the street, but that's about it. But you know how it is when you go back to an old neighborhood. If you've moved away from your hometown, some of the houses are different colors, if they're still there, and the trees are taller, but it still is familiar. What about returning to an old relationship? Changes and similarities, both. The 10,000 things. The whole cycle of life is about returning. The seed returns to the ground. It grows. It produces fruit and more seeds that return to the ground. And the cycle goes on and on. But when we read from the Tao, we think about returning to Source. Yes, to God, to the Tao, to the universe. And when you think about returning in that kind of way, what comes up for you? A little bit of fear, maybe? Resistance? Oh no, don't mention that word. Or familiarity? Mention that word. I talk to it every day. Or is there confusion? I don't know anymore what God is. I'm left confused at the moment. Or maybe you never got that far away, and the concept of Source and God is still very familiar to you, and it has been for a long, long time. So you could say, how has your relationship with the Tao, with God, with Source, grown over the years? Have you changed? Because it hasn't. From chapter 1, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. If you've been observing, you probably are aware that things are moving pretty quickly in the world right now. If we consider the 10,000 things, we often are left scratching our heads, wondering what's going on. The relevance of today's talk is that with everything going on around us, it is more important than ever that we return. Maybe it was only yesterday, or maybe last night before you went to bed, or maybe upon waking this morning that you returned to Source. You have that kind of practice, or maybe it's been a while. Define while. Maybe it's been a long time. I think that this cycle of nature that we've been reading about is drawing us back to the Tao, to Source, to God. In fact, you could look at ancient writings, you could go to the Bible and see this very clearly, where the people take the latitude that is given and stretch it just like a kid stretches the boundaries, right? A little baby or child stretches the boundaries of what am I able to get away with here? In essence, what the little child is saying is, how far away from Source can I get? And then, mom or dad have to rein it back in. Boy, that's a cycle that repeats, doesn't it? Look at the Old Testament. The wandering, the returning. The wandering, the returning. And then look at our own soul. We have times of wandering. We have times of returning. And I think where we are now is a collective invitation to return. And this is where the parent-child analogy breaks down, because there's not a mandate. It's not return over here to your plumb line, little child, or else. This is an invitation. It's a welcoming. It's like the last few hours of the Black Friday sale before the doors close. You can choose to go or not go, but what's being offered will soon end. There are lots of applications and ways we could talk about this, but I think just the main thing is that energies are changing, and there is going to be this return, our theme, if you will, to Source. Another main theme, if you will, that travels through these writings of Lao Tzu is nothingness, the emptiness, being the neutral observer, lack of desire, allowing that space, like we talked about last week, to hold and to manifest. Can we get there? That's the question. What would returning to Source look like for you? Anything from picking up on last night's conversation before you went to bed, to maybe revisiting an old friend, to maybe even pulling a Band-Aid off of old wounds. The Tao is eternal. It's all about love. Let's take a good inhale, exhale together. Now the same with an Om. Are you feeling the changes? It's not something new. It's a return. We, collectively, humanity, have done this before, many times. The benevolence of returning. The comfort of home. The eternalness of that Source. Based on what we've talked about today, and based on these eternal verses that have been with us for 2,500 years, how are you going to approach this next leg of the journey? Go it alone? Or do it with the Tao, with Source, with God? This is an invitation to return. Earth could use a few good men and women on the forefront now of spiritual sharpness, willing warriors, if you will. Not to fight a physical battle, but to make a spiritual stand. So this is a great time to take some evaluation. Is it well with my soul? Is there a little work to be done? Some improvements to be made? Or do I need to fill up the car and start a long journey home? Or none of the above. Stay on the trip. That's a choice too. If you're willing to return, even daily, where are you on the scale? I want to return to levels I've never been, you may say. Or I'm okay returning as a participating observer from the sidelines. Think about where you are on that scale and where you want to be. It's a good time to do it. And then think of other areas to return. And this is where I'll drop off and leave you with your thoughts. I should return where? And as places come up, may you enjoy the journey.